Thank you all for joining us today for the Why Oracle SaaS, Why Now? AMAG's Journey to the Cloud. With that, I'd like to kick off the presentation today that will be hosted by Apps Associates with our Vice President of Solutions Architecture with Jeff Dunford.
Hi, Tawana. Thank you so much, and good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. If you do have technical difficulties seeing the screen or can't see the screen, if you wouldn't mind just typing in the chat, and we'll try to get someone to help you out and resolve those problems. As Tawana mentioned, my name is Jeff Dunford. I am the Vice President of Solutions Architecture at Apps Associates. And today we're pleased to have Jason Federspiel and Robert Bruno from AMAG Pharmaceuticals to present their story regarding their journey to the cloud. Next slide, please, Tawana. Jason. Just really briefly, Apps Associates is an Oracle consultancy. We are a platinum partner. We were founded in 2002 with approximately 900 employees and based in Hyderabad, Germany, and the US. We are a certified excellence implementer with Oracle Cloud ERP. And we also have other practices such as Salesforce, analytics, managed services, and infrastructure services. With that introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Jason and Robert so they can discuss their journey to the cloud. Gentlemen.
Thanks, Jeff. This is, as Jeff mentioned, my name is Jason Federspiel, joined by my associate, Robert Bruno. We're going to kind of take you through, our path to Oracle in the cloud, and hopefully you can glean some insights from our experience. So quick agenda, we'll go through some quick introductions of myself and Robert. We'll give you a little bit of background on who AMAG is and what we do. Then I'll take you through our Oracle financials implementation, which happened a couple of years ago. Then I'll turn it over to Robert. He'll take you through our supply chain implementation, which we just finished this May. Then we'll go on to lessons learned and give you some post-go live, how we're operating on all the platforms now that we're live. Introductions. Myself, so I'm the Senior Director of Client Services here at AMAG. So I report to our CIO, so I'm part of the IT or technology group. I've been in the ERP space for 20 plus years. I started in telecom. At the time we had every ERP system in our large telecom company you could imagine. We had QAD, we had SAP, we had Oracle, and some other ones you've never heard of. So I've been in the ERP space in telecom. I was in the solar industry for 10 years. Did some ERP consulting for a few years with a Microsoft partner. In the last 5 years, I've been involved in life sciences and pharmaceuticals. I've been with AMAG for about 4 years now. I live in southern New Hampshire near the seacoast area. I have 2 kids, and I'm sure everybody's wondering, as everybody's polling, my kids started school last week, 100% remote. So, Robert, with that, I'll turn it over to you for an introduction.
Yeah. Hey folks, my name is Robert Bruno. Not sure that I can, I'm going to compare to Jason's excellent introduction there, but I'll try. My title is Executive Director of Supply Chain at AMAG Pharmaceuticals, so I have responsibility for both clinical and commercial supply chain. In total, I have roughly 25 years in supply chain and manufacturing operations experience, mostly in the pharmaceutical industry. I started in the semiconductor industry, actually, and I've had stints with consumer products at Pirelli in Italy and other manufacturing operations in Denmark and Belgium. So I've seen a little bit of inventory and supply chain planning as it relates to manufacturing operations in both the US and Europe. So I'm used to working directly in ERP systems and have had several Oracle implementations, I guess, under my belt, bringing organizations through from Excel spreadsheets and kind of manual processes into a structured ERP system. I'm happy to be here and hope you find our presentation interesting.
Great, thanks, Robert. So let's give you a little bit of overview of who AMAG is. We're a life sciences pharmaceutical company in bringing therapies to the market that help address unmet medical needs. We're located in Waltham, Mass. That's our U.S. headquarters. We actually only operate in the U.S. today. We have our corporate headquarters, and then we have field folks spread out across the United States. Publicly traded, our products offer innovative options to help patients managing conditions that are largely under-recognized or under-treated. We're publicly traded, but we kind of run and operate like a startup. So we have our two therapeutic areas are maternal health and hematology. So we have two commercial products, Ferraheme in the hematology space and Makina in the maternal health area. Those are the two drugs that we got up and running with our supply chain implementation. And we have one more in the pipeline called Serum Parentag. That's also in the hematology space. So that's a little bit about AMAG. So now we'll jump into kind of our financials implementation. And so while I start talking about that, I'll just paint a little picture of what we looked like prior to our migration to Oracle. I tried to depict here by the size of the icons how prevalent and how much we relied on that application prior to moving to Oracle. So you can see here that a large portion of our business prior to moving into Oracle, especially in the planning and budgeting based space, was all done in Excel. We did have Microsoft Dynamics GP as our ERP system. We were using PaperSave for invoice processing on the AP side. And we actually had an instance of FileMaker that we were using for vendor management. So that's kind of what the landscape looked like back in 2016 prior to us moving to the cloud. So again, on the planning and budgeting side, it was all Excel based. There was no actual link to actuals. Any comparison between budget versus actuals was all compiled manually. And we had no integration with our HR system for headcount or any of that kind of information. Our ERP system, like I mentioned, was Dynamics Great Plains. We accessed it through an RDP session. Was hosted by a third party. We had no integrations and disparate functions. So you'd have to set up users in GP, then you'd set them up in PaperSave, etc. So a little bit disjointed environment is what we looked like back then. So our timeline, this will give you an idea of kind of how we phased in different pieces of the implementation. So the first piece we went live on was Oracle's PBCS, or Planning and Budgeting Cloud Solution. So that project launched in January of 2017, same time our Oracle Financials ERP project launched. We were able to launch them in parallel because for our group at least, our financial planning group is separate from our accounting group, separate set of individuals, so there wasn't a ton of overlap. So we were able to work the projects concurrently. So we went live with PBCS first in April of 2017, and then Oracle Financials followed in August of 2017. One of the things we've done as a publicly traded company, we've specifically timed most of our go lives in the middle of the quarter. As any of you that are in publicly traded companies, quarter end is a hectic time. We don't really want to be implementing new systems if we can avoid it to time it with quarter end. So we've picked the middle of the month of the quarter. That gives you time to kind of get your feet under you before you hit your next quarter end close. So after we went live with Oracle Financials in August of 2017, shortly after that, in mid-2018, we had a small 6 to 8 week project to implement the supplier portal and invoice imaging. So this gave us scanning capability for invoices coming into AP. And also, I would say we've even leveraged the supplier portal more, being able to have new supplier requests internally or externally initiate through the portal. Suppliers can view their invoices and payment history through the portal as well. And then this year, we finally got MRP launched. We started in March of this year and went live in May, end of May of this year. That was a long time coming. We had been looking at Planning Central and manufacturing for quite some time, but had some different business priorities, which is why it got delayed till this year. Our implementation approach and methodology, for both projects was slightly different actually, but both were successful. So on our Oracle financials implementation, much longer project, right? 6 months was our implementation timeframe. We started with design workshops. The design workshops lasted several weeks, and we had leads from each of the key areas: accounts payable, GL, fixed assets, cash management, procurement, etc. From there, we went into 2 conference room pilots. So conference room pilot 1 was run primarily by our implementation partner at the time. And was our kind of first introduction to the platform and our users' first introduction. Conference room pilot 2 was kind of the first time the users really got in the system, started to try to transact with some of our setups in there. SIT, which stands for Systems Integration Testing. In this project, that was a completely separate phase that was really run by our technology team for some of the integrations that I'll get into in a little bit. Integrations with the bank primarily. So that kind of ran in parallel. We pulled in business users as needed, but that was mostly a technical testing round. And then UAT. So UAT was our, I think for financials that lasted a full 2 weeks. Going through every business process and testing to make sure everything came out the way it was expected, and then cut over to go live. For the Oracle supply chain project, so that top process is more, if you're familiar with different project management methodologies, I would call that closer to a waterfall type of approach. For supply chain, that was a 12 to 14 week project. We kind of adopted more of an agile approach. So again, we had a design sessions up front. These were, I think we finished all of the design sessions in the first week. Then we started having weekly sprints. So our consultant with apps would prepare one area of the solution. Let's pick item setup. So for the first week, it was all around that first sprint was around item setup. And then we got into building out the item structures or the bill of materials. And then, the third sprint might have been around getting planning up and running. And then the, fourth and final. So you're kind of building as you go. And this was super beneficial because it got our users into the system, pretty much at week 2 or 3. So they were getting exposed to the system. Then we went into SIT. So SIT in this case was all the users. It was kind of our dry run for UAT. Our implementation was validated, which I'll get into in a little bit, which means we had to meet certain FDA requirements for documentation. So we really wanted SIT to be a dry run for UAT. So all of the test scripts were already developed for SIT. We walked through them all as part of SIT, and then that prepared us for UAT and go live. What I'm trying to depict at the bottom here, we had 3 different environments to support us through all of these phases. We had a development environment, and that's primarily what we used for most of the earlier stages. Our test environment was used for both UATs, and then obviously moved it over to the production. One thing to consider is, how you're going to configure each of those environments. You can't just push a button and push your configurations from one environment to the next. So we'll get into kind of how we approach that a little later on. So why did we move to Oracle? So at the time, AMAG was considerably larger, actually. We had just acquired another company called Core Blood Registry. They were running on their own ERP system, Microsoft AX. So we were looking at a platform, and AMAG, since kind of inception, has been kind of a cloud-first company from an IT perspective. So we have very little on-prem, almost none, but a tiny bit. So almost all of our applications are cloud-based. So that was our kind of first key requirement. We wanted it to be cloud-based. And we were looking for a platform that could support a multi-billion-dollar company. So at the time, I don't remember exactly what our revenues were at. I think in the 700 million range. So really looking for a platform that could take us to the next level. We would merge off of Great Plains. We would bring in AX and move from there. AMAG subsequently divested the CBR business. I think it was 2018. So we never did move that piece of the project forward, but we are set up for growth for sure on the Oracle platform. So what did we implement? You can see the list of modules here. The one thing I'll highlight here that you probably see is missing is accounts receivable. So one of the things I probably should have mentioned. So AMAG, we're a pharmaceutical company, but all of our manufacturing and distribution is done by third parties. So all of our accounts receivable is managed by a third-party logistics company. So we don't even utilize that module in Oracle today. Maybe that'll change down the road, but that's how we operate today. And as Robert gets into the supply chain piece, we'll talk about, all of our contract manufacturers and how we interact with them. So what are some benefits we've realized from the Oracle financials implementation? Obviously, a simplified landscape. We got rid of FileMaker and Great Plains, PaperSave, and some other applications. It's built for growth, especially in this COVID environment we're in, right? So there was no real difference for our users to be working from the office or working from home. It's all cloud-based. As long as they've got a decent internet connection, they're able to operate just fine. We've gotten a lot of leverage out of the workflows in Oracle. So all of our requisitioning process now starts in Oracle. We didn't really have that process in our previous ERP system. So anybody in the company can initiate a requisition, and it flows through our delegation of authority for approval. Anybody can approve a requisition directly through email, either on their phone or on their desktop. They don't have to log into Oracle to do that. We use that on the procurement side and on the GL side. All of our journal entries get approved, and again, can be approved through a number of methods. We finally have an integrated planning and financial platform. So I'll get to the integrations on the next slide, but we have daily updates going from our financial system into Oracle planning and budgeting. So we can do a budget versus actuals at any time. Enhanced banking and AP processes. Again, so when we went live on Oracle, all of our AP payments were done by check, physical check, or wire. Today, especially since COVID, I'd say 80%, if not more, of our transactions are done through ACH, which we didn't even have the capability before. Banking, we get bank statements in on a daily basis for reconciliation and positive pay, those that are familiar with that process. And then finally, built-in reporting and analytics. So I would say Oracle has a pretty robust reporting platforms, several of them, anywhere from something like SmartView, if you're familiar with it, which kind of gives folks access to financial data through Excel. Super powerful, easy to use if you're looking for GL level data. They also have a analytics tool built in, which users can use for ad hoc reporting. And then they have BI Publisher, which can be used to develop more sophisticated reports and dashboards. So it's all real time. There's no overnight. If those that are used to the Hyperion days, there's no overnight batch processes that have to run to update the data. If you post a financial transaction, you're going to see it in any of the reporting tools immediately. So that's a big benefit for us. Migrations and integrations. How did we migrate onto Oracle, and what integrations did we leverage? So migration strategy. Again, we were we didn't have any AR, so there was no customers to migrate, things of that nature. But we did bring over all of our vendors. We took the opportunity to cleanse the data, so we only brought over those vendors that we had dealt with in the last 3 years. All open purchase orders. So this was one that at the time, so we didn't use apps for our initial financials implementation. We used another provider. At the time, they didn't highlight that we needed to bring over our open purchase orders. So we picked that up probably halfway through the project that, hey, yeah, this is definitely a need. You're going to have all kinds of outstanding invoices that are tied to your existing purchase orders. So you definitely want to plan to bring over open purchase orders for sure. We use mostly FBDI tools to import both vendors and purchase orders and GL balances for that matter. So that was pretty seamless. We brought over GL balances for the last 3 years. I think we actually brought over the activity by month, so we could run comparison financial statements. So that was our method for that. Items and inventory, we don't have a ton of items, but we did set up the inventory module, which I think was beneficial. We were tracking by lot number, even though we hadn't configured manufacturing or planning yet. It at least got us in the habit of having item numbers, lot tracking, those sorts of things. That setup we did manually, just because we didn't have that many items that we had to bring over, so it was easier to do manually. And then we took our GP environment, we brought it into AWS, and we have it there now for any historical data. So we really didn't bring over any historical data other than the GL balances. From an integration standpoint, I think I mentioned this, we have all of our actuals coming into PBCS on a daily basis, plus our financial team can kick off a refresh of the actuals at any point. It takes about 10 minutes to update PBCS from Oracle Financials with actuals. So they definitely use that quite a bit during quarter end. Like I mentioned, bank statements we get on a daily basis. That's an out-of-the-box integration with Oracle. ACH and Positive Pay were out-of-the-box integrations. And we also have an integration between ADP, which is our HRIS system, and PBCS for headcount information. So again, these are all integrations that we didn't have prior to moving to Oracle. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Robert. He can take you through our more recent supply chain implementation, and then we'll loop back for some lessons learned.
Okay, thanks, Jason. So previously, Jason went through a high-level timeline of our implementation of Oracle, showing the March to May implementation time and timeline. So this just breaks down exactly what happened on a week-to-week basis within that time frame. So we spent a good deal of time with the planning and upfront workshops in the design. So the teams were working remote. As you notice here, this is pretty much the peak COVID when things started to shut down. So initially we had planned to have on-site meetings and face-to-face and dedicated teams working together in a conference room to do this. And then all of a sudden we were thrown into a completely virtual environment. But as Jason mentioned, given that our suppliers are all third party and they're outsourced, we're a virtual company. We're fairly used to working in that type of atmosphere. But nevertheless, that was a big switch for us. So a lot of a lot of time had to be put into establishing the online relationships and getting folks up to speed with exactly what we're doing and what we wanted the system to look like. Once we got past the design and configuration, pretty much it was just a matter of testing, going back and making some fixes for what we might not have thought of originally to get us into UAT, getting the teams trained on what needed to be done. And then after that, it was a matter of cut over and go live. And then within the hypercare, which was fairly straightforward for us. And we were up and running in June. We were able to cut over our transactions. Previously was a manual inventory reconciliation that we'd later square up in Oracle. But in June, it was the first time we did an actual, transactions done by the supply chain team in Oracle that were fed to finance. Instead of like an offline spreadsheet version completed, then we'd sit down with finance, go over it, and then they'd implement the Oracle transactions to line up with those Excel calculations. It was a one and done situation. So we were pleased that we were off and running right after cutover and right after go live from a quick startup and something that was done again completely virtual. If you want to flip to the next slide. So I think for us the real questions that we thought of that we wanted to address here or bring to folks' attention with going to an ERP platform was, what are the reasons why we did it? How do we do it? And what do we see that other folks could learn from? So first of all, we wanted to get away from Excel spreadsheets. Our Excel spreadsheets were pretty good, and the planners were loath to give them up. But at the end of the day, each of the cells has a different link to a calculation. Trying to get one planner to understand another planner's spreadsheet was difficult, and we wanted to make sure that we didn't have any errors. So having everything in one place where you have your bills of materials locked in and agreed to, you have your pricing locked in and agreed to, you have your supply plans linking up to your S&OP process so they understand future spend, and it's all right there, really gave us cross-functional visibility within the organization to exactly what we were doing and what we were planning to. So that was a big driver for us. So even though we had only a few SKUs to go through, it was complex enough to warrant this type of structure. We went with Oracle because, as Jason mentioned, we had Oracle Finance, so it was a natural fit. So it was already tied in with our financials. This was a natural step, and as I mentioned previously, it was something where the finance team was already doing inventory transactions to line up with a consumption and creation of inventory. Now with the supply chain folks in the system, they could create the work orders, which would create the batches and supply, the closest to it. So then we started to get to more real-time transactions that were directly tied to our financials, which was a big win. As part of their normal day-to-day process of getting the batch records and getting quality release, we went into, we could do that directly in the system. And at the end of the month, it was just a matter of a quick tie-up. The next step, so how do we do it and how we're able to do it so quickly? I see some questions coming in. Do we want to hold these to the end, or did we want to?
Yeah, Robert, we're gonna hold it. We're gonna hold them to the end just to keep the flow going. So no problem.
Okay, great. Do love the questions. Actually, happy to address these when we get to them. So we made up a core implementation team and had dedicated folks to work on this project. So we had folks from supply chain, quality, finance, and accounts payable as part of the core team, and they were dedicated to this project. We have 2 commercial products, and within that, there's roughly 20 suppliers that we had to link into the system for how we move our materials through our supply chain. There was a validation requirement or type of validation that our quality system wanted to see. So this is something that, from a perspective of, why do you need a validation? That could be, this probably company specific or their quality organization specific, like how they handle this and what they wanted to do. from a GMP perspective or from a 21 CFR perspective, our quality group thought there may be something there. I mean, you could argue it either way, but nevertheless, we did a few high-level exercises to satisfy our quality team that what we were doing is something that they wanted to see. But the key here is that as a virtual company, we weren't using the system as our system of record. We rely on our suppliers as a system of record. And what we were doing is simply duplicating or mimicking the transactions that were already taking place, and which in turn helped improve our planning. And that was the basis for our justification for the type of high-level validation that we did. The teams actually worked really well together. So I think a lot of that had to do with we wanted to be upfront and very transparent with exactly what we were doing, what types of transactions we were doing, how we were using Oracle, how it would link in with the business processes that we had, and always bringing folks along. So not only did they understand the functionality of Oracle and how Oracle worked, but why we were using Oracle and how it fit in with our current business processes, what would change, and what would the procedures that we'd have to update and business processes that we'd have to update after go live. So in the end, we're very happy with Oracle, especially for me leading our supply chain group. We have now something that's in a financial system that we can load a demand forecast that comes from our commercial team. We can create a supply plan that will kick out, over the next 5 years, what types of manufacturing quantities and inventory levels that we'll be holding, and what's the finances associated with that. And as such, right, you can also use this resourcing, how many batches, which is exactly what ERP does, right? So you can add in there, it takes 2 manufacturing reps and 4 quality reps to produce a batch at your drug substance level or drug product level or finished good level, et cetera. So all of this was valuable to us because it linked into our S&OP process. So we have 2 levels of S&OP. We have a pre-S&OP and executive level S&OP. All these financials in the 5-year outlook go into our executive S&OP, where we look at these are the batches that we are proposing for the upcoming couple of years. This is the spend associated with that. This is our carrying costs associated with that. And we all agree, we look at the demand plan, we look at our forecast for revenue, and we all line up and say, we're all on the same page and say, yeah, that plan makes sense. We load these caps, if you will, like purchase order caps in the system. And then the planners are free to produce up to those caps over the next 12 to 18 months. So it's really streamlined our process, given it a lot of visibility across the organization, and given us a lot of structure around our inventory management and financial reconciliation when it comes to inventory. You want to go to the next slide, Jason? So I've finished there. You can turn it over to Jason for lessons learned.
Great. Thanks, Robert. Okay, so going through all these implementations, what have we learned that we can share with you? So these are some key points that we've experienced through these implementations that we thought we'd share. I'll just kind of go down the list and give you some background on each of them. So reporting, it's always the last thing typically people think about, but I can't stress enough to try to define your reporting needs early on. I would even encourage you, if you can, for key reports to get examples, even as you're at the SOW stage, right? Because you need to know, what some of the key business requirements are for reporting. Reporting can get away from you. On our financials implementation, we didn't have a ton of report requirements, but I can tell you that they were still an issue at go live. Again, that was not apps, it was another provider, but I think if we had been more proactive with reporting in that implementation, it would have behooved everybody. Everybody would have benefited, both us and our partner. So with the supply chain project, we had a list of reports in the SOW that we were expecting. And so that gave the apps team a kind of heads up too on, hey, this is what we're looking at. So as much as you can do that up front as early as possible, you'll reap the benefits. Vetting of both internal and external team members. So this is another one where I would encourage you, interview the consultants that are going to be provided by your solution partner. Make sure you're comfortable with them. Make sure you feel like they know your industry or they know the process that you're trying to implement. And same thing for your internal teams. Make sure you've got the right people on the teams that know your business process, and it'll make things go much smoother. So definitely, vet the people that are involved in the project, both internally and externally. One of the things on our initial financials implementation, we didn't, so we took the opportunity, which I would encourage you if you're moving ERP systems, look at your chart of accounts. It's a good time to redo them, which we did, but I would say it took more time than we thought to put in the hierarchy. So the hierarchies kind of rolls up all of your chart of accounts, and your hierarchy is really important for driving your financial statements. So if your finance team doesn't understand your hierarchy, or your whoever's maintaining your financial reports doesn't understand the hierarchy, or the hierarchy doesn't make sense, it's going to make your financial reports that much harder to maintain moving forward. Look at supplemental staff to help cover day-to-day or handle migration activities. So, we on neither project were our internal folks 100% dedicated to the project in terms of they still had a day job to do, right? And my guess is that's going to be the case with most of you. What we did do on the financials project, we didn't need it on the supply chain project, but on the financials project, we brought in a consultant that was separate from our implementation partner to help with a couple specific migration activities, specifically the purchase order migration, as well as some other activities. So it was somebody at the time, they were on site, not in a COVID world, but they were on site. So we kind of had direct control over what we wanted to give them to work on to help us with the implementation. So that's one way you can look at supplementing your staff. If you can't bring in another AP person, maybe you bring in, a temporary consultant or contractor for a 3-month or 6-month period during implementation to help with the workload, because it is, there'll be weeks where your internal folks will be spending 80% of their time on the project. During testing phases are heavy times, during design phases are heavy times. So just plan accordingly. Fixed price versus time and material statements of work. I've done both. It's kind of a personal preference, which you prefer. What I would say is if you're going to do fixed price, make sure that you spend a lot of time on the statement of work to help working with your partner to determine what's in scope and what's out of scope. Because obviously if it's not in the statement of work, it's not in scope. So even our fixed price project, we still had change orders against that, right? Because things came up. I tend to prefer a time and material type contract because I feel like I have more control, and if I want to invest resources on a particular area that we didn't think of, that's our decision. Whereas if you have a fixed price, it takes some more negotiating time, but that's strictly a choice. You will most likely need custom security roles, so just plan for it. We didn't need them on our supply chain implementation, but we had several on both our financials and our supplier portal implementation. So just make sure that's on your radar. Yes, Oracle has hundreds of roles out of the box, but you're going to need several custom roles to be created. It's not hard to do, but you need to plan for it from a timing perspective, from a statement of work perspective. This one's particularly pertinent now. So 100% remote implementation can work if you have the right team in the right situation. So obviously going into our supply chain project, we weren't planning on being 100% remote. But as Robert showed, 3 or 4 weeks into the project is when our office shut down and we went to a complete remote environment. And I would say the things that made it successful were we had a very dedicated team internally that didn't lose focus of the project, and the consultants we had through apps were also dedicated to the project and engaged the whole time, right? So engagement is something that can be a struggle on any project, and when you go remote, it can be even harder. So, for us, it worked just fine. We were concerned a little bit about UAT. How do you handle that? We use Microsoft Teams for collaboration. We had several Teams meetings going on during UAT days. So some people would break off into separate team meetings to work on certain areas, and then we'd all group back up at the end to go through the test scripts, what passed, what didn't pass, what issues do we have. So it can work if you have the right team and the right situation. Get users into the system as soon as possible. I think I highlighted this on our overall methodology. That was one of the advantages with the supply chain implementation and the sprints and the more agile approach. We were able to get users in the system pretty much on week 2 or week 3, I think. So that goes a long way to getting them comfortable with the system, especially a system like Oracle. There is a lot in the system, right? There's a lot to learn. So the sooner the better. So we mentioned validation. So validation is specific to a number of industries, drug industry being one of them. It's really a requirement around additional documentation that the FDA wants to see. So just make sure you understand, work with your quality group. Is validation a requirement? And if it is, build in extra time. It just takes time to get. We had to do an audit with Oracle. Our internal team wanted to audit Oracle. Oracle's a big organization. That takes time. You can't just say, hey, I want to audit your operations and 2 weeks later be done. It takes a lot longer than that. So just be aware for that and plan for it. And then lastly, kind of match your business process with the Oracle functionality during the build. Don't wait till after it to be like, oh, we've got to change that process after we go live. No, you should be working on changing those processes as you're going through testing and design even, right? Because some of those changes to your process may impact the design based on what your needs are. So those are kind of our lessons learned. Next, I'll just move on to, now that we're live, what does that look like? This is what we were trying to showcase with this slide, and then we'll open it up for questions. So we're on cloud. We get our quarterly patching or updates in the middle of the quarter. So every 3 months we're getting a new update. So we have 2 weeks to test that in our dev and test environment before it goes into production. You really you have to make a very strong business case to Oracle if you want to defer taking that into production. We haven't needed to defer any of the updates since we've been live and since 2017. Not to say we haven't run into any issues with the updates, but anything serious has been addressed quickly by the Oracle support team or leveraging your managed service provider. But just keep in mind, 2 weeks is not a ton of time to test out, do all your regression testing, right? So we probably have, before supply chain, I think it was about 30 test scripts. Now with supply chain, I think it's closer to 40 or 50 test scripts that we run through with each patching cycle quarterly in that 2 week time frame. So again, it doesn't give you a lot of time to kind of work through those. There is an opportunity for those that are in the life sciences industry. Oracle has offered up a life science cohort, which basically gives you an extra month to do the testing, which is helpful if you're in a validated environment because the documentation requirements for that are much more stringent. You've got to have screenshots for all of your regression testing. So that's something to look at if you're in the life sciences industry. As I mentioned, we have a dev and test environment. We refresh those regularly. You have to request that through Oracle support, but they handle everything. You just have to make sure you give them enough lead time. They typically need 3 to 4 weeks of lead time to refresh the environment. And when they refresh it, it takes, usually it's done overnight. So pretty painless process. You just have to prepare ahead of time. And then how do we handle support? So at AMAG, my team, we're a small team of 2. We typically handle the tier 1, tier 2 support issues. So we're kind of first level triage. If we can't resolve it, we'll work with apps on the managed services side to help resolve the issue. And that's worked out pretty well. The one thing I will say is we do maintain our financial reports, and we do that because we kind of designed the reports with our finance team initially, and we find it beneficial at times. There will be very short turnaround time sometimes, especially at quarter end, with changes needed to the financial reports. And it's not hard to do. We could certainly leverage managed services, but we find it easier to keep that capability in-house so that we can turn around the requests very quickly for our finance partners. So with that, I think that concludes our prepared slides. I guess we'll open it up for some questions.
So Tawana, I'd prefer if you moderated and got the questions out, and then Jason or Robert could answer those, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Absolutely. So thank you so much, Robert and Jason. That's super great information. We have a lot of questions rolling in from a couple different sources. I'm also giving somebody the shout out for who actually texted me one. So thank you. So I'm not going to go in any particular order. If we miss your questions because we've run out of time, we'll certainly send you, we will get the response to you. So Jason and Robert, here we go for a couple different things. One, did you implement a handheld device for supply chain bar coding and receiving?
No, we did not.
Okay.
Again, we're a virtual manufacturing environment, right? So probably not as applicable for us.
Right. If you're using a CMO and no manufacturing, why move to the Oracle Cloud?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, so I've had experience at both production sites where we had direct manufacturing and we were virtual. And for me, you know, there's enough complexity in our supply chain, and there's enough busy work for our supply chain team to do the inventory reconciliation, or even the finance group to do the inventory reconciliation, that it makes a lot of sense, even as a virtual company, to have the ERP system. I mean, you can do the core planning in Excel. I mean, there's no doubt about it, and I don't think that the power of Oracle as a computational tool is any different than Excel. So you're not getting any net benefit there. But just having that structure. I mean, your bills of material are structured. Your financial pieces are structured. If I want to know from my supply chain team, like right away, hey, send me out what's our carrying cost going to be in 2021? They can bang that out. They don't have to go to Excel and add in what's the unit cost, what's this supposed to be, like what's our estimated, you know, target inventory levels. So for us, it made a lot of sense. It brought as a virtual company where our finance team was originally doing the inventory reconciliation, that believe it or not, the supply chain team wasn't even focused on what the net inventory levels were at any time. If you want to know what the inventory level was, they'd say, go ask finance. So now, as a matter of business process structure, now we've rolled that in. They're more than aware of what our current holding is. They know when they're watching for upcoming expiry. We're running reports on, this is going to expire in the next 6 months, the next 12 months. What are we doing about this? So there was there was a ton of added value for me to have this in a structured ERP system and take it out of Excel, even though that we don't have our own manufacturing.
Great. Here's another question. Did you do T&M for one and fixed price for the other?
We did. So our initial financials implementation was fixed price, and our supply chain implementation was time and materials.
Okay, great. Here's another one. How many SKUs were planned with Oracle Cloud, and how many suppliers?
You know, it was, I think, 12 to 15 SKUs and roughly 12 dozen or so suppliers.
Okay.
Yeah, for supply chain, I think we have over 2,000 suppliers in general in Oracle, but what we set up for manufacturing, right. Yeah, wasn't
great. That's a good point. I was thinking specifically very focused on supply chain, but Jason's right. We have a lot more than that.
Okay. Can you please let me know if you're using Oracle Cloud Quality Module?
We are not.
And then are you using an internal material transfer process? And if so, do you see any challenges using it?
So we are, Jason, correct me if I'm wrong, we're using a move immediate effectively right now.
Correct.
So we didn't feel the need to put that type of constraint on our internal movements. Now that said, we do mimic the movements in Oracle. Even though we do a move immediate, we will put the portion of material that we're moving over to the next warehouse for that transfer into like a quarantine mode, so that we know, or an in-transit mode, so that when we run, if we cross over the month end, we can see, and finance can see that, like, hey, this material's in transit, so we know that we can't use it for putting into a BOM. We have to wait for that material to get there and actually do the transaction there. So in not using the internal material transfer process within Oracle, we're still trying to mimic the actual process with a simplified immediate adjust.
Robert, this is Jared. Sorry to interject. So IMT is it's an Oracle term for what you actually just described. You are doing those transfer orders between the CMOs, and you're keeping them in transit while they're on the water to get to the CMOs. But the internal material transfer is just an Oracle term to move the material between the two different organizations. So you're using it from a system perspective. You're just describing it. You're describing the function the way you're using it.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so here's another one. After go live, has the maintenance changed quite a bit in your organization? For example, do you have business analysts, IT, or competing FTEs?
Competing FTE. I'm not sure what.
Computing FTEs, right? So
Computing.
IT, yeah, that's the question.
So certainly we have, like I mentioned, in our IT organization, I have one full FTE on my team that supports Oracle, as well as some other applications across the enterprise. And obviously, we have Robert's team has several planners that are in the application. They will reach out to our group if they need support. We're supporting the finance users as well, but really, we have one FTE and some managed services that we're using to support the environment.
Great. And then did you have many roles fall out of seated Oracle roles, and how did you validate your roles with segregation of duties?
Good question. So we didn't have a ton I would say we created, on the initial implementation, I would guess we created 3 or 4 roles, and then after the initial financials implementation, we've probably created another 4 or 5 over time. So we probably have roughly 10 custom roles, and they tended to be created to prevent segregation of duty issues. So, for example, when we launched Supplier Portal, I think the out-of-the-box role had more capabilities in it for users that wanted to request a new supplier than we were comfortable with. So we had to create a custom role to limit that role more. And that's typically what you'll find is some of the out-of-the-box roles give too much access, especially we're a small organization, right? So you might have somebody that has accounts payable manager role and accounts payable specialist, but you may not want them to be able to do something specific like modify a supplier or cut checks. So those are the types of things that fell out for us as a smaller organization.
Right. We're getting down to like the last 2. So the second to the last is, can you please highlight issues that you have faced specific to supply planning?
We haven't come across many issues. I think the one that comes to the top of my mind is more around how we have the business structure set up, where we just can't issue a purchase order beyond a cap that we've set, because our procurement group basically doesn't trust us to drop the POs when we need to. But that's more of a business process related thing, you know. So far we are you know, we've loaded up the orders, and my team's not indicated any issues at all so far with our supply planning. I mean, it's moving to the targets we want. We had a couple little oddities that we're able to work around and get programmed into the go live that seem to be working fine. So far so good.
Yay. Well, that's exciting. And then it looks like we are down to, we may have had one more come in. Are you using transfer orders to move materials between organizations? Roughly how many times do you have, how many items do you have in your supply chain? That's a combination question there.
Yeah, so you know, according to what Jarrett said, who's
yeah, go ahead, Robert.
Jason or?
Yeah, I was just going to ask.
No,
Jared.
I think. Yeah, apparently we do have that. We are using it that way. So what I described is a internal transfer order. And yeah, we have roughly a dozen, 12, 15 items right now in our supply chain for the Oracle, the supply planning.
So it looks like, let me see, I just want to make sure that I'm not missing any, I'm not sure this one. Issues faced to supply, apricot to supply planning. I'm not sure I'm understanding what they're asking. Let's see. I think we actually got that one. Okay, sorry. And then we finished off. So it looks like we have everything answered. I know we're getting right to the top of the hour for anybody. If there are additional questions coming in, we're certainly happy to get that response to you. And thank you guys for this was wonderful. Great insight to your guys' journey into the cloud, and hopefully everybody learned some great lessons learned that they can use. So thank you to the team for coming today to help us answer and share your journey to the cloud. And I'll turn that back over to Jeff.
Yeah, so Tawana, thank you. So if for whatever reason a participant thinks of something that they forgot to ask or wanted to ask, you know, we can just get it over to the place where you registered, and we can get your response. So that's the only thing I have to add. Jason and Robert, excellent job. It's always great to hear from someone who's actually done it and is living and breathing it every day. And, you know, great lessons learned, great questions. So I thank Robert and Jason, and I also thank all the participants for attending. And I hope everybody has a good day. Thank you.
Thank you.